what I use. Actually, I did use that on the bowl.
We're on YouTube.
Oh, we're on YouTube. We're live.
You feel free.
Well, the demo.
Live on YouTube?
Live to where? Well, I think it's and then you have this. Like here. Vanilla, and that's just naked coconut. So we don't have a naked.
How many viewers?
Okay.
Okay, so Peter, last time you were saying that the gross nature of desire is to desire what is not here, right?
Face versus point.
And it's unsatisfying because you only get what it is you already have right now. And the subtle nature of desire is self-engagement in real time, and it's always satisfying. So I've got some quotes from William Blake, and I wonder if maybe these elicit something from you, or if you just basically agree with them. Right? So the way
Look, generically, I basically agree with William Blake. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
But you can do that if you want.
Okay. Right.
Well, you know, Cameron.
Okay. Right. So here's a quote. It's from Marriage of Heaven and Hell, which is one of my favorites. So he says, "Those who restrain desire do so because theirs is weak enough to be restrained, and the restrainer or reason usurps its place and governs the unwilling."
I'm not sure I can parse that. I need to sit and think about it for a while.
Oh, okay. Should I read it again?
Read it in context, too.
Oh, well,
The restrainer, just the last half of it.
Right? Oh, I'll read the whole thing. "Those who restrain desire do so because theirs is weak enough to be restrained, and the restrainer or reason usurps its place and governs the unwilling." So it kind of sounds like there's this reason thing that comes in that that screws up. No?
It's just too much. It's too much structure. You know, there's only one thing here, and the only thing that's happening is it is being itself. It is doing what it does. And to talk about things like desire and, you know, all of these things as if they were separate components is unrealistic and is just liable to confuse you.
Right? So if we were to talk about delusion, it's just this one thing is doing itself, and there seems to be some separation at some point or some perspective.
What about that?
So that's what happens.
Well, it can seem to happen, sure. Anything can seem to happen, but what is seeming to happen is just a description of something that is not that way. Because what is actually happening is indescribable. Can't be resolved. In other words, it can look like delusion, and it can look like spiritual quest, and it can look like revelation, and it can look like all of these different things. But none of that is actually that. All of that is the transcendental nature of this that is here. In other words, trying to make sense of it, or trying to structuralize it, or trying to, you know, determine the way it functions and what to do about it is all completely irrelevant and just liable to generate confusion.
So
the very nature of what is here is confusing enough without piling more onto that.
Yeah, but it seems like most spiritual poets or spiritual teachers, they'll develop their own sort of terminology and their sort of symbol system, which they use to convey whatever is going on, and then I guess the point of or the thing that the student or the reader has to do is sort of, you know, immerse themselves into that and then get beyond it.
Well, the point of any symbols is the thing symbolized. So the only point of talking about this is to direct your attention to the this. And what matters is the thing talked about, not the way it's being talked about or what's being said. Because any speaking about reality does not capture reality and does not accurately indicate reality. You know, and this is a great pitfall of most, you know, virtually all philosophy and spirituality. You know, the important thing, the words of a spiritual master, the important thing is to look at what he was talking about. Don't look at what he said about it. When I say he, I mean that generically.
You know, figure that, and Gavin, I mean, the thing about poetry that is so great is that if you just sort of, well, it's sort of like looking at something raw reality. And if you just sort of not try to put a definition on it, I mean, that's what's so great about poetry. It doesn't put a definition on anything. It's just sort of like a metaphor.
It should be evocative.
Sprinkles and stuff. And what's important, it's my husband. We had this really great conversation once when we were really stoned, I admit. But what's interesting about poetry is not the actual words or the symbols, it's what's between the words. In other words, there's a space that's created. This is how poetry and metaphors work. And so you can never, it's just like raw reality itself. You can never, ever, if you try to pinpoint it, you're going to put a prison around yourself. So a symbol is like Blake or anyone who's trying to say, well, this symbol means this or this symbol means this. They're missing the point altogether. And it's just, poetry is just a way to let you wander in this space. And then, yes, I mean, certain words are more important than others. But anyway, that's what I feel about poetry, and that you know, that realization that what's really going on in poetry is not the words themselves, but the space that gets created, and it makes you sort of, you know, push beyond any concept or symbol.
Sure. The follow-up question to Peter would be, it seems like you do something different where you're always changing your terminology and taking away the concepts that you built.
Right.
I try to.
Whereas it seems like most teachers or poets have like a coherent system that they build up, that it's like their own sort of symbol universe. Okay. I'm going to keep on quoting you. Because you did say at one point about
What's he saying?
No, this isn't a direct quote. This is this is his writing. It's like things that you said. Like you said at one point that were like these beams of light moving off into infinity or something like that, right? And then you said also that you could describe the same thing as unending darkness, right? And I'd like to hear you talk about the unending darkness. Because you usually talk about the point of light or the radiance or whatever.
It's just another way of putting the same thing. Light isn't really light and darkness isn't really darkness. The only advantage of putting it in terms of darkness is it's often put in terms of light, and so it's easy to think of that, but it's a polarization that light versus darkness, and that light has some implication, but it's absurd. Reality is not dark and it is not light. It's something else entirely. It's transcendental. And yet it can look like light, it can look like dark, it can look like all this other anything that can seem to be true. But again, it doesn't matter. There's no point, it's like this, as compared with like that, because anything you can say about it is inaccurate. And compare that inaccuracy with some other inaccuracy, because the way they're being put seems to be contrasting, is irrelevant. This that is here is absolutely in complete contrast with itself, and yet it never departs from itself. So our language reflects mostly the aspects of it that contrast. We talk about, light versus dark, or high versus low, or happy versus sad, or green versus red, or whatever. But reality doesn't have a versus. Reality, high is low, green is red. It's all one thing that presents as this inconceivable apparent differentiation in variety. But there's no way to put that in language, because language includes differentiation. It doesn't include inclusion very readily. Language is only useful because words are different from each other. If I have a sentence that's just if is the only word, then my sentence is how useful is that? It's more accurate probably than these other sentences in English, which imply that there's this distinction versus that distinction. But again, the distinctions aren't negated either. You can make as many distinctions as you want, but be wary of thinking that they're actually simply that way. It's not that they're not that way, it's that they're vastly more than being that way, in a way that utterly transcends the relevance of the distinctions actually being distinctions. Do you follow that?
Could you say, Peter, that there are all those things all at once?
Yeah.
And more.
Yeah. Yeah, but without negating any of the specifics. I mean, it's an astounding situation that doesn't lend itself to rational analysis.
Mind blowing.
Yeah, mind blowing. So there's nothing wrong with trying to use precise language and all that, as long as you bear in mind, especially when you're trying to draw distinctions between this and that there isn't actually any such thing. So it behooves you to use language artfully. You can use it precisely all you want, but use it artfully with the understanding that what you're referring to is the way it is, which is not the way the language implies that it is. Because language implies that distinctions actually exist.
You have to use language sort of fluidly, so that it's
artfully,
never static.
Intelligently, artfully, flexibly.
You could say use it evocatively.
Yes, exactly so. That's the most artful use of language, I think. Or that's up there anyway. Language doesn't define anything. but it can evoke or generally indicate something. You're gonna put that back to me.
He's taking notes. He's taking notes. You're in trouble.
I'm not in trouble.
No, he is.
I'll get on one of these things.
Okay, you keep trying. Maybe you'll just blow your own mind, then you won't have any more questions. Peter Starkey said, normally don't.
Jesus
Christ. FBI is
That's a good joke.
I don't really know, you know, some of these vitamins or something, really cool stuff.
Words aren't what they mean, you know?
They what?
Words are not what they mean.
No. That's what my teacher says.
Blame it on her.
Him.
Her. Who knows about her?
Portobello does this, right? For the kidneys, something. Just taking it.
Where's the duct tape? Where's the duct tape when you need it?
Oh, you need more than duct tape.
Oh, yeah.
Me too.
So, Peter, I think at one point you said something about looking forward to death and the adventure that awaits.
Right?
Yeah.
What about that?
But death is also right now, right?
Yes.
So there's no difference, or there will be no difference, there is no difference.
Well, you can't say there's no difference. It's the same, but you can't say there's no difference.
There's always different.
There's always difference, but it's always the same. But the difference is negated by the fact that it's the same. See, that's the problem with language. Language implies sameness and difference to cancel each other out. But in reality, it's not like that. In reality, sameness and difference are not mutually exclusive. On the contrary, sameness presents as infinite difference, and difference is always the same. You know, not as a mind thing, but literally, physically. In reality, it's not like that.
Sorry. I think that's what we need to do, turn the sound down. Where's your sound thing? Right here. Right here, too.
Nothing like Peter's causing you back now.
Trouble sound right there. No, right there, right there. See, mute. That's mute? That's your mute. There we did, we muted it. Thank you so much. Oh, really?
What were you
I need to make you sit in the corner. How many cups of chai to your room?
Man, I'm just like,
Can you say more about that?
just out of the wilderness.
Same and different, and simultaneous. And it's wrong to say that like there's superficial difference, but
There's not superficial anything. Superficial is a word which really doesn't indicate anything whatsoever. Difference and sameness indicate something, but again, they're not mutually exclusive. Which in reality, which logically, according to normal rational logic, they are. This that is here is precisely itself. It is what it is. And yet, it presents as infinite differentiation. And even the differentiation is infinitely differentiated. You cannot find any sameness, and yet you can't find anything but sameness. Literally, not as sophistry, that is literally true. And so, the important thing is to see the way in which that's true, which you can't think about because it's irrational, it's not thinkable, and yet it's perfectly obvious. Look at the field of your experience right here. Look at all of this inconceivable, every portion of what you experience in any sense field or in any aspect of your mentality or psychically or in any way whatsoever is precisely the way it is, differentiable from any other aspect that's appearing within any other aspect of your experiential field, right? So there's this infinite differentiation, and yet it's all simply this. It's all the bubble of your experiential field. So, and yet you can't find that. If you try and pin down the experiential field as a sameness, as a thing that is here, you won't find it all. You'll find its difference. And yet, all of that difference is this sameness. It's not findable, but it is known. And the challenge is to see for yourself the way that is so. See it clearly and self-verifying. And you can't think about it. You can't, it's not a logical proposition that you can get to through argument. But it's intuitively completely obvious if you simply look at your experience. Just look at, you can take just your field of vision. Look how completely different every single, point in your field of vision is a different brightness and color and contrast and everything else with every other point. No matter how closely you look, wherever you're looking is different from the points that are immediately adjacent to it, and so on and so forth. And yet, it's all one thing. You close your eyes and it disappears completely. It doesn't disappear piecemeal. It's not some whole that's made up of the sum of its parts, where all of these little differences are all discretely existing. It's not like that. It's a single thing. It comes and goes as a whole, but you can't find that whole. All you find is all of this differentiation, which is how it presents. And so play with that in your own experience and notice the way that it's so.
You can't find wholeness?
You can't find the whole as something you can point to.
Because then it would be partial. Where would you be pointing
I mean,
from?
wholeness as a notion is an abstraction, but wholeness as an actuality is a self-verifying, intuitively perceived actuality.
It's also an experience. You can
Yeah, experience, of course, yeah. I mean, absolutely, we're talking about experience.
Yeah.
This is always the point, is look at your experience and let it show you what it is. And it has its own intrinsic, inherent nature, which is clearly revealed. It's not hidden at all. It's very obvious.
And it's whole,
It's whole.
inherently.
Yeah. I mean, that it is that is completely self-evident.
And yet it's completely untrustable.
Totally.
It takes to find itself.
Yeah,
And
you
then
can't pin it down as anything. So it's absolutely indeterminate, which is the weirdness of it, and which is why it's so confusing. Because even though it is precisely the way it is, you'll never be able to pin down the way in which that's so. And again, that sounds like a mutual exclusion right there, but it's not. It's just the very nature of what this is intrinsically paradoxical. It's a very strange condition that exists here, and nothing but that strange condition has ever existed. And from the point of view of consensus reality, humans look at it and completely miss the mark and describe, abstracted aspects of it as if they've existed in their own right, and none of it does. It only exists in the way that it actually does exist in itself, which does not correspond to the way anyone has ever described it, because it's indescribable.
And that's sort of the hardest thing for me to acknowledge, to continue, I guess to continually accept, because, the first realization, it's very weird.
It's very, yes.
That's all I can say.
That's the number one.
But, I just, there's so much other information coming in that's saying, no, it's not weird, it's this, or it's that.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
I don't know.
And that's not negated.
No, it's not
exactly, that's
negative,
weird.
it's just that it's.
In other words, that's there too, and that's
Yeah, it's
weird.
just sort of like these parallel universes. I mean, like, you know, I mean, I've told people about like my diabetic, you know, coma, you know, experiences, and or you know, or maybe being high, and you just get there's weird for sure, but then there's all this other information that's coming in that is also part of being weird.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem weird.
Right.
Because I guess I've been brainwashed or something.
Well, it can seem to present a pseudo-coherence when there is no rational coherence,
Right.
and yet there can seem to be.
Well, and the coherence actually, in some ways, is beautiful or nice. I mean,
Well, sure.
It's being created by this just as much
Yeah,
as anything.
exactly so. Yeah, it's just another mode. It's just another mode of. It's another mode of this.
I would rather watch a really entertaining, you know, intellectual, common sense, you know, artistic movie than not. Okay, so why not just do that in the same in my reality or my universe, you know,
Sure.
my experience.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't. You know, it doesn't matter where you gravitate in terms of interfacing with this in various modes, but it does matter the extent to which you intuitively know what it is.
Right.
Because that way you're not credulously being stuck in any partial perspectives that it can be perceived in.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with any of these partial perspectives. They're all fine because they are all, of course, reality itself.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with rationality. There's nothing wrong with intellect. There's nothing wrong with all of these things. But the tendency might be to become stuck in them disproportionately without perspective if one doesn't know the actual condition, and that's where liberation comes in. You know, it's what liberates is direct, clear, self-verifying knowledge of the nature of what this is. And once there's any degree of that liberation, then you have carte blanche to be with that any way you want, and you won't get trapped there. You won't get stuck there, because you'll be empowered to know that it's not the whole story. It's just a partial perspective.
In fact, that's what becomes weird rather than the state of
Absolutely.
The state of this is is no longer weird.
Yeah, rationality and intellect is inconceivably weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was talking
Non-weirdness is weirder than weird.
Right.
How could that happen?
It's actually nonsensical.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because weird actually gives it
No, sure.
a presence. But in fact, it doesn't make sense.
No, nothing makes any sense. Nothing makes any sense whatsoever. And the fact that it can make sense doesn't make sense.
Well, that's just it. You see that it doesn't actually make sense. It's just a board game rules, and that's all that it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's a relatively partial perspective. Yeah.
So.
I think I could write a poem about it.
I think that I shall never see a poem as lovely as a tree.
Oh, shit, it's been done.
That's right.
So most of the day, whatever I'm doing, I'm also noticing.
Uh-huh.
Like, noticing that whatever is experience is just experience.
Yeah.
It just keeps on ising, like it keeps being.
Good.
But there's certain things that just grip me when they get certain mind patterns or feeling patterns, and I just get pulled into the. And then I fall into behavioral patterns and trying to deal with that.
Right.
And
How does that feel?
like suffering.
Okay. Right.
I may just like limited and stuck and.
Right. Okay.
And yeah, I figure you're just going to say that it's just more of the same.
Well, it is more of the same, but in terms of your personal trajectory of unfoldment, where these things seem to occur that you get stuck in, that seem to be, real in a way that is entrapping to you,
Right.
is an indication of, an opportunity to discover the way in which that's not so. And the way to do that is not necessarily to work with the places you get stuck, but to continue with your noticing, to continue with noticing the isness of experience. And as you do that, that of its very own nature will deepen and become more powerful and become more ubiquitous. And as this occurs, then as you get into these other relatively more sticky perspectives, you'll be noticing more and more, you'll have a kind of a background sense of the isness and notice that it's there. And this will get stronger and stronger as you develop more and more familiarity with the depth of presence, with the depth of being. Until one day you won't get stuck at all. You'll still perhaps get sucked into these perspectives, but you won't give a shit, because you'll know full well that they're it's just an arbitrary perspective, and it doesn't have any staying power. It doesn't have any mass behind it, so to speak.
So like right now, I notice there's some part of me that it's like maybe half identified, that it's like, it's agonizing to sort of wait until, it clicks, at least by degrees, and I don't have to.
Yeah, but the best advice as a strategy is, don't attend to those areas that are suffering. Give your attention to the noticing. Because the more giving attention to something feeds it. It's like pouring gasoline on a fire. And obviously you will find yourself giving attention to it anyway, and that's okay, because if you can't help yourself, you can't help yourself. But by and large, to whatever extent you seem to have some wiggle room there, so to speak, you may feel like you say, partially feel yourself that way, and then partially not. So try to give your attention to the not more. Not as an antidote to the stuckness, but just to see how cool it is to always go to the accentuate the positive kind of thing. Go to the juiciness of that let yourself be seduced by it. Go to it hedonistically.
To some other region in the field.
Yeah, somewhere where it feels unstuck, somewhere where it feels more noticing. The idea is to retrain yourself. At present, let's say portions of your awareness is addicted to these kinds of stucknesses, and what you want to do is retrain it to become addicted to the unstucknesses, to become addicted to the noticing, to become addicted to the amazing richness that is. So the way to do that is you develop. It's like sensitivity training. You're developing a skill set of, first of all, noticing that that's there, and second of all, becoming more and more sensitive to it. And you become more sensitive to it by hanging out with it, by being with it, by attending to it. And that builds up, and as that builds up, it becomes more attractive, and ultimately, that will be much more attractive than your soap operas and your stucknesses. And when the stucknesses are happening, they may or may not be happening, but you won't give a shit, because you'll be drawn to this other that is also always coexisting with that.
And I'm pretty sure I just have a question, because you said the stuckness and versus the noticing.
Yeah.
But it makes, like, to try to use the words effectively, like, I'm noticing wherever I am. I'm just noticing things that are not stuck versus
well, that's
stuck.
good. That's good. That's very good. But again, you can't go by formula, and you can't go by words. you have to work. You have to dance with these energies yourself. It's an artfulness. If you can do genuine noticing in the stuckness, then that can be very powerful. But it's quite possible. But yourself what that means, and learn for yourself that that's not just a trick of letting yourself be stuck and having it be okay.
I have to learn myself what it means to be noticing in the stuckness.
Well, as you develop skill with what noticing is, you will become more and more skillful with seeing it, and then you'll become better at noticing in the stuckness. And at that point, the stuckness will no longer be a stuckness.
Yeah.
You know, the words are not exact.
Sure.
It doesn't mean exact. You know, there's a lot of inaccuracy implied there. Remember to turn on this now.
And
Great, yeah.
the focusing into areas that are not stuck.
Right.
It's not to like get some juice that's like an antidote to this.
No, definitely not. If you're doing it as an antidote, you're actually still oriented to the stuckness.
Yeah.
Right.
When you try and solve a problem, looking for a solution, that is still oriented to the problem. And the point is to stop orienting to the problem by orienting to something else that's more interesting. So you move away from the problem through disinterest rather than through a quest to solve it, because that's still recursively referring to the problem, so you're still oriented to the problem and still feeding it.
Right.
You don't want antidotes. It's not about antidotes at all. That's why a good attitude is an attitude of hopelessness. So a good practical attitude is I'm fucked, I'm screwed, I'm never, you know, I'm just totally, you know, my life sucks and it's always going to suck, and that's that. So you're in an attitude of giving up. It's like, oh, I'm fucked, I'm screwed. So you're not in a mode of trying to solve anything anymore. It's like, I'm never going to solve this. I'm just like, it's hopeless. I'm just, life is horrible. And then at that point, you can sort of look around and say, yeah, okay, so given that, what else is there that's here? So then you're not orienting to the what else in terms of an antidote, because you've adopted hopelessness as an across the board attitude towards that. I mean, this is just one trick. It's not necessarily that you have to take that approach, but it can be a useful stance.
It's like being used to the idea that you have a terminal disease.
Yeah, I mean, hope is one of the greatest traps. Hope is one of the greatest stickinesses to stuckness.
Well, when you think about it, because it keeps you thinking that things can be different than they
Yeah,
are.
things can be better. I can fix this.
So in a sense, you're giving up hope means you
Yeah.
give up pretending it's something
Yeah.
other than what
Yeah.
it is.
I-
It is what
yeah.
it is. So
And I
forget about it.
think that's one of the reasons
That's
why 12-step programs and that sort of thing are as powerful as they are.
Oh yeah, that's what I was
Because-
just thinking about.
Because their whole, you know, the whole basic stance is, I'm screwed. You know, I'm an alcoholic or I'm an addict.
alcoholic.
I'm an addict, you know,
That's that.
and I'm screwed, and that's how it is. Now what? And so having adapted that mindset is actually very liberating, because you no longer have this whole rat race of, I've got this problem, I have to solve it, I can do this, or I hope I can do this, and all of a sudden you're just in this enormous and striving enterprise which just sucks all your energy in and doesn't, of course, get you anywhere.
But after that, something does happen. I mean,
Of course.
there's a sort of liberation.
That's the point.
And once that happens, it's not like a hope. It's just
No,
what
it's
is.
yeah.
Well, there is
It's a
something else.
relief.
Yeah, there's always something
There's
else.
always something else,
Right.
and
But you're
sort
not
of-
you're not trying to grasp it as a solution.
No.
You're just, and that's
It's
what
just
makes it
there,
powerful.
that's all.
Exactly.
Well, and also going into the recognition that there really are no problems.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
so
It's
just
just
And more
Yeah.
importantly, there's no solutions.
right.
Right.
Well, if there's no problems, there are
Yeah.
no solutions.
There's no problem, no
There's no
solutions.
solutions.
And then so now what?
It's all
So,
built in.
and all of a sudden you're curious. All of a sudden you have some free energy.
Because you have circumstances and you can examine them rather
Yeah.
than trying to change them.
Well, and you're also in control in a way, because
Don't go there.
you're not at the mercy of these other circumstances that may or may not happen to you, and, you know.
I mean, there are, like, you know, I mean, I've experienced this. I mean, there are, that creates, in a way, sort of another problem, maybe for just like old past history or something. But, you know, like, well, why can't I have that all the time? Or, you know, there's sort of doubt. Was that really, was I just fantasizing about this liberation? You know, there's all those things that happen too, though.
But instantaneously, you just go to the past.
I mean,
It doesn't matter because all of that is just trying to explain it.
right.
And once you start opening to experience, you discover very quickly that it's unexplainable. And so whether or not you are explaining it, and also whether or not you're trying to explain it, becomes less and less relevant.
Yeah.
So I can be sitting here saying, God, am I just a crazy person? Is all of this, you know, is all of this liberation and all that just a fantasy? Okay, cool. The mind can be doing that, but the mind is doing that where? Here. What's here? And all of a sudden, wow. So again, nothing is contrary to anything else. So the fact that the mind is obsessively trying to tie you in knots, that is not the contrary of open liberation, because that's the context that is happening.
A while ago, I began to notice this kind of quality of things, especially in terms of there being some problem or something to struggle with in some way. That wasn't just for me in my own psychology, but I began to notice it everywhere. And it's this odd little thing where you kind of go along and you're kind of fussing with something, and then maybe you go to sleep or something, and then the next time you try to notice it or it comes into view, it's not the same thing. It's the basis of it. It's changed in some way, and there's no way that the problem doesn't even fit anymore.
Yeah.
It's like something, and that just keeps happening. So
Yeah.
it keeps,
Yeah, everything, you know, again, when you begin to notice experience, you discover this amazing slipperiness. Circumstances have absolutely no persistence. They're continually morphing and slipping out from under you, just like the sand at the beach as the waves comes in, you know. There's no constant pattern. It continually changes, and you see something, and whatever you saw is already gone, and it's never going to come again. And there may be something that's reminiscent of it, or some degree of similarity, but it's not the same. It's different. And every single aspect of your experience is like that across the board. You cannot have the same experience twice, period. So the details of every single thing you experience are always slipping away and morphing and being replaced by something else that may have some degree of similarity, but it's different.
well, this began to make the whole notion of fixing things or problem solving just
Yeah, because there's no things, there's no problems. There's just these. It's like looking at the clouds, watching them change. You know, you look at a cloud, and all of a sudden, at one point, oh, that looks like a lion. You know, but in mere moments, it's not going to look like a lion anymore. The lion's never going to come again.
Well, that's why, you know, I mean, to keep a problem going is really a fantasy.
Yeah, it takes a lot of energy.
In our mind, it actually doesn't exist like it was.
Yeah, it's like saying there's always a cloud that looks like a lion around.
Like God trying to go back to but I was having a dream last night, and there was part of it that was unpleasant, and then I left the room, and then I realized somewhere in the dream, I don't have to go back into the room and talk to you anymore. and just, there's this compulsion to want to go back and try to fix whatever it is was going on, but it doesn't exist.
Right.
So, it's like, that's a relief.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, it's all about, this is the power of noticing. What noticing reveals is the nature of experience. And experience explicitly reveals all this incredible slipperiness, this incredible unresolvableness, this incredible depth of richness. it's just completely obvious, and it becomes more and more clear the more you let yourself be with it openly. And that undermines all of these notions of things actually being a certain way resolvably, and there being a resolvable you that is stuck in some resolvable circumstances that you need to somehow solve. I mean, all of that is such a fallacy. It's just so not true, and it's really obviously not true. And the more you experience the slipperiness, the actual explicit slipperiness of the flow of experience, the less that stuff has any staying power. The mind may still go there, and the mind may still sort of orient to things as if that was the case, but it becomes more and more absurd because, yeah, really?
You know, one aspect of this observation is to take it away from the apparent external of circumstances and recognize that personality is also just something happening. You could equate personality and inclinations and all of that stuff and tendencies with what we would normally call external circumstances, right? Because that's also just appearing the way it does. So when you are mulling over something over and over and giving yourself a hard time, just recognize that that's just something else that's happening.
Of course.
If you can recognize that even for a moment, you start seeing that the notion of control is also a concept, because the personality comes up, and the moment that it's noticed, so to speak, whether you have control over noticing it or not is another question, or another thing to examine. But you also see this, that personality is a circumstance, is itself circumstance.
Yeah. Well, but it is a pattern.
We just there's this belief, which is also a circumstance, that is close, that it's us, that it's me, that it's personal, that it's, I can't do anything, that we don't even notice it, in a sense.
There's no entities. There are no things findable. All there is apparent patterns appearing in whatever this is, what I call radiance. And everything is personality is a pattern. The world is a pattern. Other people are patterns. The computer is a pattern. Anything whatsoever that you can think of as a something is actually an apparent pattern seemingly appearing in your experience. And this pattern has several characteristics, one of which is that it is completely transient. Whatever the pattern is appearing as we were just talking about, it's already gone and appearing in some other way, endlessly, without ever recurring, number one. And number two, no pattern can be resolved as to exactly what it is. So patterns seem to be most patterns the less closely you look at them. The more closely you look at them, the more you discover the infinity of information that is being presented, which is not coherent. It doesn't come together into any kind of coherence, into any kind of unification, into any kind of a structural entity that is actually there. On the contrary, it turns out to, again, the more solid a pattern seems to be, the more it is just a free association on essentially a Rorschach blot of just incredible rich experiential characteristics that have no integrity, they have no coherence. So all that ever shows up is all of these apparent patternings. And in delusion, we assume these patterns imply that there's actual entities there. I see these patterns that I think of as being my personality, so I assume there's actually a personality there. I see these patterns that I interpret as being my body, so I assume there's an actual body there. I see these patterns that seem to be the world, so I assume there's a world, and so on, so on, so forth. And this is, this is how consensus reality is constructed. But again, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. If you look closely, you discover the fact that all that is here is these infinite and absolutely incoherent and absolutely, unstable, instantaneous, apparent patternings that are not actual patterns. And again, this is not an abstraction. This is experiencing this phenomena reveals very clearly that it is that way. It's very obvious. And so all there is this bizarre, miraculous field presenting as an infinite degree of apparent patterning with no patterns to be found. And you can't find what the patterns are made of, and you can't find how it's happening. You can't find any of it. It's just this very, very strange richness of information that doesn't actually come together as being anything. Even though it promises to, it seems to, if you don't look too closely, it seems to be, wow, look at all this incredible, there's all this information and it must be telling this incredibly intricate story, but it's not. It's just random noise, basically.
But still at that same, still at that sort of wow moment, I mean, there's just clicks in, like this ceaseless quest to see something, or to make sense of it, or
Sure.
to know what it is.
Sure. And that's an aspect of the consciousness that does that spontaneously.
Yeah.
There's a subsystem that is continually analyzing, is continually trying to generate coherence. But again, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
No. But what does stand up to scrutiny is the quest.
Yeah, sure. That's part of its vector. Whatever is here is very, very powerfully motivated to check itself out.
Yeah.
In all sorts of dimensions. And one of those dimensions is the dimensions of exploring the hypothesis that maybe it all makes sense in some way. So part of it is looking at itself, trying to find the pattern, trying to, see it as being coherent. And there's enough information, it's a rich enough Rorschach blot, that it can seem to succeed, or at least have a lot of food for thought, let's say. But again, that mode is not the only mode in the first place, and in the second place, it never actually succeeds. It doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
Peter, I've been thinking about this in terms of functionality and kind of wondering, is that just a fantasy? That's just a subjective way of seeing things. Like, I can pour some water in a cup and then I can drink from the cup and I'm functional. And I can have a dream and, get a good night's sleep and wake up and feel refreshed.
Yeah. Well, all of that happens, right, but that way of describing it assumes that the patterns being described actually exist, and they don't. So that happens, but what's happening when that happens, you can't know what it is. You can't pin down what it is. You'll never get to the bottom of what it is. It's not negated.
Yeah.
It's not that that's not real. Sure, it's completely real, but it's not that. It's not you pouring water in a glass and drinking it or whatever. It's not that. It's describable as being that, but that description is very partial and makes all sorts of assumptions which do not stand up to scrutiny, which are unverifiable.
Peter, you talked about dreams, and there's when Pino had his experience, the shaman guy came back to him and asked, "Did you have good dreams?" And Pino was describing how the animal spirits seemed to come to him, and the elongation of the movements and so on. And then the shaman said, "Oh, those were good dreams." And is it basically there's a realization that happened? It sounds like of the order of what you're talking about with the patterns unraveling. Like is there a realization of that?
Something along those lines. The acquisition of deeper experience of the nature of energy is itself, a revelation, is itself an unfoldment. And again, just whatever terms you want to describe that in is irrelevant. But, the process of unfoldment is basically affected to the extent it is a process, and to the extent it can be affected by greater familiarity with the nature of this amazing energy or whatever it is that is experience, and is the dynamism and actuality of experience. The greater familiarity, the greater intimate, unfettered by preconception engagement with this there is, the more that will percolate as liberation, as an understanding of what's going on here that essentially negates or invalidates the normal human perspective, which is, again, the nature of bondage, the nature of suffering and stuckness and all of that, delusion and so on and so forth.
And you talked about using drugs to get out of the normalcy. But what about using like kava to dream more intensively?
Whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter what you do. Any exploration of experience, generally outside the context of your normalcy, is a potential avenue of exploration.
So you talk about sameness and difference and indeterminability and specificity is indeterminability basically sameness and specificity difference.
Yes, but that's pointless because indeterminacy, because it's also the other way around. All four of those words mean the same thing. So again, why bother to try to find polarities from them? That's just another way to confuse yourself. No structure can be found with this. No order can be found with this. So trying to, play with structure or order is just barking at the wrong tree. I mean, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but the most powerful thing to do is to see the way in which that's useless. See the way in which that's not so. It's irrelevant.
It's hopeless.
Yeah, it's hopeless.
There you go.
The mind, a portion of your mind, a portion of your consciousness, its very nature will continue to do that anyway, and it doesn't matter. But it's only a portion, and that portion exists within a vast field which is not like that.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting. I mean, this whole idea of being stuck. I mean, there's just really only a very, very small portion of me that's stuck.
Yeah.
I mean, and and once I sort of see that, I mean, I don't see it all the time, for sure. I'm stuck probably 90% of the time. I don't know. But, I mean, the main point is once I see I'm not stuck, it just seems so obvious.
Yeah.
And I just can't understand why it's not obvious all the time. It's just...
Well, because you're not really stuck all the time.
Well, I know that. That's
No. I mean, from a real experiential point of view, you're not stuck all the time. You're always doing something different. You're always thinking something different.
Of course.
And so, in a sense, that's part of the hopelessness. You don't really need to worry about it or have any hope of ever having that knowledge stick because it doesn't need to.
Yeah. No, at this point, I really am not worried about it.
No, I don't
It's
think.
just,
No, you're not. I'm just saying.
No, I'm just sort of. I'm
No,
marveling
no,
at
no,
the
no.
fact that I can be stuck. I'm marveling at the
And it may or may not be, but I'm just saying that in effect that what you're saying is true. You're not really stuck anyway.
I know.
So I just sort of
It's
wonder.
just being hypothetical.
I think it's.
That's what I'm saying.
It's
You're not
interesting.
saying
It gets down to, Pam,
Somebody is.
it gets down to what we might call habit.
Hmm?
It gets down to what we might call habit.
Habit, yeah.
For example, this is your house and that might be your favorite chair, I don't know. And so when you're in this room, you might tend to, or when you're in the house, you might tend to gravitate to this room and you might tend to gravitate to that chair.
Yeah.
You don't need to.
No.
You could go, if you sit over here, you sit over here, you go to some other room. But habitually you may have a tendency, and I don't know that this is the case, I'm just supposing here, you may have a tendency to come into this room and to go sit in that chair, because it's your habit. And stuckness is a lot like that. It's like, it's a familiar mode of hanging out in your energy, in one's energy, that we tend to go back to just because that's what we're used to doing. That's what we do. Just like, you know, it's easy to have your favorite space that you go into, and you tend to go into that space and you tend to hang out in it the way you usually do. But you don't have to. And, you know, so a part of this, this aspect of the power of noticing is in noticing, you find yourself in alternative orientations. You find yourself not there, but over here, or in another room entirely, or out of the house, or whatever. And so you acquire proportionately more, you accumulate more and more experience outside of the habitual normalcy. And so that just proportionately begins to outweigh the normalcy. And so then even if you come into your normal space and hang out with it in your normal way, it's not something that you usually do, it's something that you occasionally do. And so it starts to feel less and less stuck, even if it's essentially a similar thing.
Yeah, I think that's sort of what I was sort of trying to say, is that I'm obviously, I know I'm not stuck.
Yeah, of course. Well, you have a lot, you know.
But it seems like I am stuck. It
Sure.
appears like.
But it doesn't, but again, stuckness is not actually stuckness. And so when you're when you're an advancing yogi, you don't need to be not stuck, because it doesn't matter if you're stuck, because when you know when you're stuck, you're not really stuck.
Right.
So you know, the advantage of all this training is to see that you're not stuck. Once you see that you're not stuck, you can be as stuck as you want. You can always come into this room and always sit in that chair for the rest of your life, and you can be happy as a pig in shit, because even if it always repeats, it will not be entrapping, because you know that it's not a stuckness.
I find it sort of a miracle. I'm wondering, I mean, stuck.
Yeah.
You know, it's just sort of like a little phenomena or something. I don't know. It's weird.
It is weird, that's for sure. Well, why don't we take a break for 10 minutes or so?
Good idea.
Great idea.
We'll be back in about 10 minutes.
Or not. Or not. You never know. 9 minutes and 24 seconds. So Peter started, he missed that whole thing. Aww. He says he's gonna go back and listen to it. He was at the other end of the room and he didn't quite catch it. Oh, that he's our drug dealer? We're not on mine anymore.
Yes.
There's ice cream in the freezer.
Yes.
So don't eat it over here.
Yeah, you're right, it's in front and center, Lily.
I'm getting up. You are so beautiful. I do think so. No.
One taste at one less. What about it?
There it is.
Oh no, it depends on the context. There's like
I didn't put any on, whatever was in there.
sex cult and SF. That you
But yeah, put some more on in there if you like.
But one taste, it's like a contract thing, right? So it's non-duality or
That's what I was trying to write. You know, it doesn't sound right on the, you and I were saying the same thing. Just, it doesn't sound right on the camera. I was trying to say that. I was reiterating, I was saying, yes, that's exactly what that was. Not stuck.
duality breaking down whether just being one.
You know something, dude? I'm not Cuban, okay?
Right here. Usually there's
That's your problem, right?
there's a evaluation of it.
Oh, good. down, and it goes up on its own.
Yeah, it seems isolated.
And it goes up on its own. You know what, I see it on the side of my family. Family reunions with my family's work to tell you.
Julian.
I call it, well, it's the last.
But it just seems like, oh, everything's my experience.
No,
That's my.
she has a lot of it is. She did this whole series of people,
Is that right?
sort of,
Well, it's not true. Really, it's you.
so that's narrative.
Really?
I would go narrative.
No, it's like I'm the central processing chamber.
I have a problem. If you go on
And the night that connects her.
she has all that stuff.
Or I'm
And she has, Peter and Lily have one, another woman, Donna. I think for the Donna, I think that woman, I think probably the guy. So she used to fly.
No, that's not good.
And I were saying, it's just
Not good. Sit in front of that.
Seems immediately intimidating or sensitive.
Puppies or something. I don't know.
Limited. I don't think they go, but it's definitely. Not as rich as it should be.
No, that's not Jillian there. No, none of them are.
Yeah, but then there's like, oh, well, but it should be more than this.
Oh, so have you gone to the show?
Minus all the things that I interpret out of it, or interpret out of it. Yeah. Interpretive kind of.
I was just telling Pam, unless you say it, it doesn't sound right, I guess. She and I were saying the same thing you were saying. I think I was doing a better job than she was, but that's my personal opinion, of course. I'm partial. Good pie. Mm. Mm.
Sometimes all too often, I'm this little
A little more
personality.
sugar next time.
Your hot water's ready. Most people spend their time to get it. Yeah,
Can be yourself.
Wow.
Probably not. Just, I guess there is enough similarities in
No.
appearance to appearance.
No.
It seems like it's more or less the same.
No.
But I suppose it's obviously.
Wow.
What's that? Make yourself
Saving her car today is why I'm here.
I guess probably an interpretation.
Her car. They fell out of my, well, I took 2 minutes to take her car. Yeah. But I found it. That's what
Goodbye, John.
Yeah, but the thing is,
Yeah,
like,
delicious.
it feels like it's,
Oh, did you have some?
it starts as an
Little
intuition,
taste?
that it starts as an intuition. Like,
Just right, not too sweet.
like a direct intuition.
I was gonna say it needs a little bit more sweet.
Not so much, or
Then I have
the
to
thought comes after, right? But then it's attached to something.
In the mind?
It's more direct, like a feeling sense of
Yeah.
a body, or
Yeah.
Just inside.
feeling
I'm
sense
trying
of
to
something.
focus out. Rather than in the feels
Yeah, a
inside.
feeling sense of a partialness. Yeah.
It's a good, yeah, that's good.
Could that be?
Yeah.
Oh no, maybe that's probably just another clock. That's great in this integration. Just an assumption. What's that? But that's interesting.
Cool.
But that's something you notice.
I'm inspired. It's just a current. I think
But the thinking is the right. Yeah, it's hard to get behind that or before that. Like it seems like I have to get to some sort of tiredness. A posteriority.
Wouldn't hold up in a totem
Because
pole.
people buy it because the ring goes in it. So
That's how
it's
it's
blatant perjury.
Okay, now I can go back and see.
Which I happen to study in college. Okay. Gonna be an aspiring lawyer
You majored in perjury,
lawyering.
lawyering.
That would have been lucrative though.
Oh. Of course.
That's a good course, lucrative.
Yeah.
You majored in lawyering, I majored in liaring. Same thing, actually.
When I took my deviant behavior class, that's when it all shifted. I was like, oh, I think I'd rather study deviant behavior.
Specialize in deviant behavior.
Specialize in my own.
It feels more comfortable.
More,
I'm at home.
certainly more, easier, more entertaining.
Oh, I went to college for 10 years. I think I'm still going.
Okay.
I don't, I think I
It's not about going into the details and going into the details until you figure out the way to it.
It never ends. There's some other
That's pretty good.
Gavin, you put your book down.
Only for a moment.
Okay.
Only for now.
I'm back. I'm very quick on the draw. Irma and I were, are we starting again?
Yes?
Irma and I were talking about something interesting about, so that it's possible to notice that feeling sense of a separate self as it's arising, right?
Oh, it's not, yeah, I mean, there's a sense of anything as it's arising.
Yeah. And,
But what does that mean? I mean, you can only notice it when it's arising because there's nothing else to notice. It's not there unless it's arising.
but one gets more and more into the details of that, Right? So that's
What do you mean one gets more?
the noticing part, right? As you say, you can go as specific as possible, or get more and more specific, and notice more and more indeterminality or whatever.
Sure. That's not liable to be the most efficient way to go about it, though. There's something like that where it's liable to already be an entrenched, habitual way of orienting to your experience. It's probably more powerful to notice elsewhere that also coexist with that. And then notice the way that that exists in exactly the same way as a sense of self exists. So let's suppose there's a sense of self, and it really feels like, oh, I'm here, and I'm me, and whatever, blah, 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 that's fine. But this is also here. And I can notice the here-ness that this has, I can become very familiar with it intimately, and I can notice the here-ness that, that whatever sense of self has, and I notice the here-ness is exactly the same, the presence is the same. And so there's not really a solid basis for distinguishing between the two. All experience is present in exactly the same way, whether you're used to qualifying it as you or not you, subjective or objective. And that if you engage with that experientially very intimately, it becomes clearer and clearer that that's so, that it's all exactly the same, and so there's no basis for distinguishing. It's completely arbitrary. It's possible to approach it the way you suggest, where you as you say, experience the details of the whatever you're saying, your sense of self or whatever. But that's liable to be more difficult. But by all means, play with it. If you can get some mileage out of it, that's great. It's liable to be more difficult because you already have a sense that it is a certain way. And so you're liable to see the detail that you're accumulating as being an aspect of that way that it is, rather than seeing that you're interpreting it as being a certain way from the get-go is artificial.
Was there any more that were that's all?
But any sense of self, or let's say personal identification, exists as a portion of the experiential field, and always exists. There's always more than a sense of self present. To the extent there feels a sense of, let's say, separate self. And noticing that that's the case can reveal the arbitrariness of that defining. Part of the challenge in identification is the essentially hypnotic nature of the way consciousness orients to itself. Basically, if you have a thought or an idea, the consciousness tries to simulate that idea as if it was so. In other words, the consciousness play acts. It imagines what it would feel like for that to be so. And so it simulates any condition that is suggested to it conceptually. It simulates what that would be like. So, which is the mechanism by which it can seem to, I seem to be a separate self, and I feel like I am. So that feeling like I am is generated through essentially hypnosis. Otherwise, it's just an abstraction. And so this is why looking at aspects of the experiential field that are not being identified with, or outside of that field of suggestion, or outside the universe of that suggestive orientation. And so if you notice that what is there, is experience outside of that, interpretation, and you can look at experiences inside the interpretation, and you get the sense that they're the same thing, because they are. You can see the way in which they're the same, which can minimize and render more and more transparent the hypnotic sense of identifying of it being real.
So curiosity is not confined within the habitual.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Curiosity it permeates the whole experiential field. The problem is habit. Again, habit tends to, make one feel as if one is constraining one's attention, one's curiosity within the interpretive field, and one downplays and ignores vast areas of information that are considered irrelevant or unimportant. And discovering the arbitrariness of that is another very powerfully liberating aspect.
The arbitrariness of habit?
The arbitrariness of what is being held to be relevant and important versus what's being held to be meaningless. For example, you're sitting in a room with a bunch of people and there's a conversation going on. Now, if you're a normal human being, you might feel like, oh, the conversation is important, the people are important, but that particular shade of beige on that particular spot on the wall is unimportant. Because the conversation is what we're here for. That's what's important. That's what's happening. But that's a very artificial interpretation. Everything that is present is equally present, equally real, equally important. And partializing it, hierarchizing it as this is more important, this is more relevant, this is more worthy of my attention than something else, is artificially imposed on it. And so part of the training and noticing, I recommend, that's very powerful, is to devote your attention to things that seem to be unimportant in your experiential field. And you'll notice how rich they are and how fascinating, and you basically are training yourself to acknowledge the curiosity that you have, that is, again, it permeates the whole experiential field, which will tend to diminish the sense of hierarchizing, where you're only interested in a certain small aspect of what seems to be happening, and you're writing all the rest of it off as irrelevant.
So you start with the unhabitual or the seemingly unimportant,
yes,
and then you follow your curiosity through
Well, because it seems unimportant and you start, but because you're starting there, if you open to what's there, you discover, oh wow, this is really interesting, it's really cool, it's a lot going on there. And that spontaneously stimulates your curiosity. And then you train yourself to notice that wherever you look, you discover the same richness, and that disempowers the authority of your sense of importance, of hierarchy, of where this is important and that isn't. So you stop negating, discounting vast portions of your experience, most of which are outside of describability and outside of rationality. For example, if you look at your experiential field, you discover there's the sense fields, and then there's the mental field of thoughts, and so on and so forth. But there's vast aspects of experience that you can't even put words to. They aren't anything. They're vibes or flavors or moods or, like sort of the experiential equivalent of intergalactic phenomena or something, intergalactic void. But it's not nothing. And typically we completely ignore that because who gives a shit? It seems like nothing's happening there. What's happening is here, in this room, in this conversation. And, that's the normal human framework. And so the focus is that's what's important. But there's all this huge space of actual experiential qualities, present likewise, that we usually discount as noise in the system. But as you open more and more to the depth of anywhere you look in your experience, it's a lot like astronomers a decade or two ago. They trained a telescope on a portion of the sky where there's nothing to be seen, just to see what they would find there. They literally looked they found a spot where no stars or anything showed up at all. And they trained like an extremely powerful telescope. It took a very long exposure. And in that space of empty sky, which was tiny, 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 like a little pixel in the night sky, they found like, thousands of galaxies or something. I mean, I don't know. And just because they looked hard. And this is analogous to what one finds anywhere you look in your experiential field, you find that the experiential equivalent of thousands of galaxies. Anywhere. And we're used to not noticing that. We're used to, diminishing the vast swatches. The majority of the experiential field is just sort of being irrelevant noise in the system, and we're only interested in this very highly censored, small percentage of it that fits in within our narrative of what we're doing is important to us, which is all fabricated. And so noticing reveals that. Noticing clearly shows one that, and then it shows the arbitrariness of identifying with human importance and human, social interaction and all that as being the main thing that's happening.
I guess part of the difficulty that I have is that I have the sense that curiosity comes from one's nature, and one's nature is somehow related to habit, or habit is also a manifestation of one's nature.
Yeah, habit's a manifestation of your nature, but your nature doesn't come from habit. Curiosity is intrinsic in your nature, but your nature is vastly more than you're used to acknowledging. Your nature is unlimited. It's specific. Your nature is exactly the way it is, but that nature exactly the way it is also infinite. Again, we have the paradox of things being specifically the way they are, and having that specifically the way they are being infinitely unlimited. So you're exactly the way you are, which is different from me being exactly the way I am, but you are an unlimited infinity, just like I'm an unlimited infinity. Even though I'm the way I am, and I'm not the way you are, and you're the way you are, and you're not the way I am. And again, that's another one of those paradoxes that you can't really make sense of, but it's in the nature of the way unresolvability works, the way infinity works.
There's even another paradox in that, which is an infinite infinity is everything.
Yes.
So your infinite infinity and my infinite infinity are actually the same.
Yeah, they're the same, even though they're completely different.
Because there's only one thing.
Yes, there's only one thing, and it's completely different from itself.
Yes.
Go figure.
Man comes into a room and says, "Gosh, there are 4 people here." It's a joke.
Is it your
Sounds
job?
like empty room, you mean, right?
Did you just make that up? Yeah, I know. It sounds
Very good.
nice.
So a priest, a rabbi, and
I'll walk into an empty room. Separate.
a Zen master walks into an empty room. What does he say? Quickly.
No, it isn't.
No, he doesn't.
What did he say?
Doesn't say anything.
So I'm kind of focusing out, looking at the room, checking out little, just things that I not notice otherwise. And I noticed like kind of like a pleasant wash of like sensation over the body and stuff. And but I guess there's a part of me that's like, is that it? Or it's like
Planets, galaxies,
or like what is that like? When it's for the person when it kind of reaches a culmination of.
Don't worry about that. There's a portion of your mind that's always going to be looking at it and second guessing it and trying to describe it and playing games with all that stuff. But just ignore that. Just go on feeling it from time to time. And again, you don't need to hold the feeling. It's just an exploration to do. And when you're doing that exploration, this other portion of your mind may be analyzing and doing all that. But they happen at the same time. So again, don't attend to that. Attend to the feeling, the exploration. Again, to whatever extent, don't try and hold it or push it. You know, if you lose it and you get sucked into your mind, that's cool.
I mean, I think I tend to be doing something all day, because otherwise the mind is kind of going all
Sure.
day.
Yeah.
Like I notice, like sometimes when I go like get into it, zone out, see what that's like.
Mm-hmm.
Fuzzy.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. I mean, all these kinds of experiments are good. Just don't worry about your mind too much. And the mind may seem to be a counterweight that's sort of pulling against that, but just don't even worry about that either. Let the mind do what it wants. It's like just assume that you're a crazy person, but just because you're crazy doesn't mean you can't enjoy your experience. So there's a portion of you being crazy, you know, trying to second guess things and undermine yourself and figure things out and whatever it's doing. But at the same time, there's other portions of you that can enjoy your experience. You can dig on your experience.
This becomes difficult though when I have so-called responsibilities.
Sure.
Because, you know, it's like, it seems maybe I'm wrong that I have to kind of get myself to do them or push myself to do them, otherwise I won't do them.
Well, maybe. Yeah, maybe you'll do them, maybe you won't. Maybe you push yourself to do them successfully. Maybe you push yourself to do them, but you still don't do them. I mean, that just has to do with your functionality. And, you know, maybe you're a bum. Maybe you're a scoundrel who's never going to meet your responsibilities. And so what? Other people are like that. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that all of that takes care of itself. Whatever degree of responsible functioning you feel motivated to rise to, you will do so, and that does itself. So it's not like it requires a lot of attention. And even when that's happening, whatever's going on with that, even when that's happening, it's not the only thing that's happening.
Well, I mean, you say that it does itself, but isn't that also part of the present moment dancing with my energies? To like, try to not, you know, I mean, I think there are things that would lead to like a more pleasant, safe, you know, life.
Uh-huh.
Which I find prefer over like a shitty life.
Right. Well, if you prefer it enough to do something about it, then you will try to enact those kinds of behaviors.
Is this separate from noticing practice, or do they kind of?
No, it's all the same. I mean, what you're noticing is what that is, because that's not really the way we're describing it.
What about you?
Talking about motivation or responsibility or functioning or action or all of this are not actually, the realities of all of that does not correspond to accurately to the words we're using to refer to it.
Yeah.
And noticing is the same way. Noticing is not actually noticing. Don't get caught up in the description is actually implying anything or it actually being anything like that. It's all just weirdness that you dance with, always. And that applies to responsibility, it applies to your mind, it applies to noticing and tripping out on your behavior, on your experience, it applies to anything. It's all really just dancing with your energy. It's just the dance of radiant presence dancing with itself, which is all it is here, ever. And so all these ways of describing it, the whole point is to see the partiality and irrelevance of these descriptions. So then when you're spacing out, that's radiant presence shining. You know, when you're fighting with yourself about trying to muster up the motivation to meet your responsibilities, that's radiant presence dancing with itself, and so on and so forth. And noticing is coming to see that more and more clearly.
Well, let's say like since you woke up, even though you're seeing everything as radiant presence, could you said that you worked on your functioning to be like functional and responsible and this?
No,
No comment.
Maybe less.
no,
No.
not necessarily.
It's just the way.
You know, the more clearly you understand your situation, the more liberated you become, the more your functioning will tend to find its own natural line of this resistance. So you'll tend to gravitate towards your towards your inherent degree of functionality, and have less contrivance of trying to live up to somewhere you think you're supposed to be, or conversely, being critical of yourself for overachieving or whatever. So when you're in a less liberated perspective, you tend to have all sorts of confused interpretations revolving around anything, and especially your own functioning. And as you become more and more clear with seeing the nature of this, that all of that complexity tends to dissipate or become less relevant, and all of your actual functioning will tend to gravitate towards the more inherent nature of your actual nature, of the nature of what you are, the energy system that you are. So if you're really a less functional person who's been neurotically feeling driven to be functional, you may find yourself settling into a less demanding lifestyle where you don't have to be quite so responsible. You know, you might find yourself attracted to learning the joys of living under overpasses and things like that. or maybe not. Maybe you'll discover you're actually a super functional person who's had neurotic urges or confusions around underachievement or self-judgment or who knows what, and you'll become more functional. Who knows?
Probably one of those two.
Well,
There's all sorts in between.
yeah.
This dancing with itself is like you dance with like a human partner. You know, you do it for a while, and the two dancers start to get interested in like physically interested in how that dancing is going, and there's a response, a kind of intelligence and inventiveness that happens every which way, you know. And so this is not like any kind of one-sided thing. It starts, everything responds.
Yeah, it's responsive to itself. It's a very subtle and magical, wonderful thing.
That's a good metaphor.
And
Two dancers.
and even in let's say participating in this dance, which is definitely, you know, inside of me. Would you say it's less about a particular outcome and more the sensitivity to the partners inside of me?
Absolutely, it has nothing to do with outcome, and it's not so much that it's inside you; it's what you are. The inside and the outside of you, to the extent there is an inside and an outside, is all this dance. Your entire being is the dance of your own energies with themselves.
And so any part of that thinks it can direct the dance is confused.
Yeah, that itself is just another element in the dance.
Yeah. Right. And if they get caught in that, then that part is just kind of taking the stage for a while.
Yeah, sure. But you never actually get caught in it. You can just feel like you're caught in it. Through a kind of obsessive, you know, zooming in or something.
Right.
Oh, that's coming back to the analogy of human dancing, like the traditional thing, ballroom dancing. Male partner would be leading, but it's not like that. Once you get very good at it, there's this whole thing going on where nominally there's a kind of direction being chosen, but it's like the flow is
it does itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's intelligent on every level.
Yeah.
And to sort of appreciate that with as this, talk about like freedom and fun, you know, that's just, you can't stop.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what's happening here. And the more clearly you come to see that, the more joyous and beautiful and luscious it all is. But nothing is excluded in terms of, seeming to be personal and seeming to be personal functioning and seeming to have your personality and having your personality seem to function in various situations and, blah, 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 blah. All that stuff comes with. It's not negated. But all of that is seen to not exist autonomously, but to actually be aspects of this amazing transcendental event.
I feel like the kid in the room grappling with these issues of responsibility and functionality.
Yeah, it's all good.
I had an interesting experience of watching just like shit ton of television, and then seeing my astral bodies as the characters that were in the shows, and I got this really intense feedback, which was not pleasant. And then I said, maybe I'll stop watching a shit ton of television, and actually just kind of see what. I had this thought, which I know is, of course, it's not accurate, which is, why don't I let it show me what's actually there? But it seemed to come from somewhere real. So I kind of had this like inverse experience of the dream kind of taking me for a ride, and I really enjoyed it. It felt very pleasant, and it was a much more dynamic and like bizarre experience. And yet I would wake up and go, oh, okay, cool. Go about my day now.
Sure. Again, just because the dominant human psychological stance seems to be identifying with oneself and identifying with oneself as a doer and as a functioner and as a, more or less a motivation generator or whatever, that is somehow, trying to impose all of that on the environment, that's very artificial. It's quite possible and very easy to experience the environment as a doer and the self as a passive reactor to all of that, and so on and so forth. Because none of it is actually like any of that. It's all arbitrary.
WTF.
And even though, let's say these energies that are me dancing cannot be actually parsed out in a clear way, is it useful to become familiar with like dominant patterns?
No, don't worry about it. Don't try to analyze it or make sense of it. You can watch it. Watch it as if it's all not you.
Okay. But for example, like if it seems like there are two main energies that are kind of grappling with each other, would you say even to let go of seeing it as two, like trapping two, and just like it's better than?
Yeah, just let go of the whole thing. Don't try to find any structurality there. Just be the looser you can be with it, the better.
Because
it's not actually any one way. And seeing it any one way is partializing it. It's not that it's not any one way, it's just that it's more ways than that as well. And the way you're seeing it might not be a particularly dominant mode. It's a pleasant ringtone.
Is that basically where you exist, just watching all these dancing, watching the dance of energy all the time?
Yeah, basically. Except, yeah. You're the watcher, but you're also the energy. So it's not polarized where you're watching and it's dancing.
Doing the dance.
Yeah, you are watching, you are the dance, the whole thing. Again, any way you put it is partializing it. It can't be put, it cannot be expressed. But it's all with itself. Nothing is cut off from itself. And it's all you. And there's infinite possible perspectives, all of them viable. And none of them is more true than any other one.
So when you said that, like I kind of thought crossed my mind, what about like other people?
Right.
And I felt this, like talking to you, it's like, I felt this like almost pulse of like spontaneous love. It's just like
Sure.
this energy dancing with
Sure,
itself.
it is. It is that. You know, there's so many polarities. You know, everyone is you. Everyone is themselves and separate from you. You know, there's just all these polarities, and they're all true. They're all viable. They're all aspects of what's here, perspectives of what's here, but none of them are true or any more true than any other one. So it's a mistake to suppose, oh, it's that way. There's no that way. There's a myriad of that ways, and they're all viable.
This may seem like a naive question, but I'm just gonna throw it out there. Like I'm in grad school for psychotherapy,
Mhm.
and you know, class level is like a mindset or taskmaster, like I need to pay attention and to learn these
Right.
skills. And
Sure.
is that I guess is that useful? I mean, I guess I can just watch the dance. What's like the class?
Well, it depends. It's useful. It depends on the game structure that you're engaged in. If you're in a situation where you have to be able to regurgitate a bunch of specific information in order to pass a course or something, and if you want to pass that course, to graduate and move into practicing that or whatever it is you want to do, then it probably behooves you to play that game and learn the stuff. But that doesn't exclude just watching it, because that's happening too. All of these different perspectives coexist. It's not a matter of having to choose one or the other.
Well, I think the academics have such a problem. One problem, they just want to be a good, effective psychotherapist. So maybe
Sure.
that the meaning of that breaks down, like when I spend time here. Like,
Well, maybe, but again, as with anything, you find what it means behaviorally. You'll know what it means to be an effective psychotherapist after you've been a psychotherapist for a long time. And it probably won't be what you thought it was at any earlier point. And it probably won't be what your courses are telling you that it is either.
And so if that activity turns out to be like dance, like having that job and career, that's fine. Just what it happens to be.
Sure, whatever. Maybe it won't. Maybe something else will happen. Who knows?
I don't need to worry about it. Just kind of watch.
Well, whether you worry or not, and whether you watch or not, has nothing to do with anything. All of that may or may not occur the way it does. It doesn't really matter. Nothing has any importance. I mean, let's say no particular outcome or no particular course of events has any importance at all. At all.
But I've experienced agony, and I don't really like that.
Cool. Try and navigate away from it.
And that's,
Good luck with that.
Jesus.
is that like rootless? Like,
No, maybe yes, maybe no, but whatever. I mean, it's an art form. It's a dance. You don't know what you can do until you do it.
Is unstuckness the same as excess and at the same time the opposite or different from?
What?
I'm going to try one last time to talk about your terms. So unstuckness and excess.
What about him?
It would seem that the excess that leads to unstuckness, or that it is.
I don't know. I don't know. What's your experience?
Um,
How do you feel about that?
well, it seems with moderation or responsibility or whatever, like there's a sense of a limit, you know, and well, even with excess, there's a sense of overcoming a limit, so there's still the sense of a limit, right? I guess in that way, there's still a sort of stuckness, but there's
Not necessarily. Excess reveals that what seemed to be a limit is not a limit, because you've transcended what you thought was a limit, but you're operating in a context that is beyond that limit, and that's still actual. So it disproves the limit.
it also proves or brings it to an experience of sort of free exuberance.
Sure, absolutely. Free exuberance is a nice metaphor for the nature of the life force, for the flavor of the life force. I mean, we were talking about the radiance dancing with itself. Free exuberance is pretty much one way of putting its mode. But that free exuberance is not the opposite of any degree of apparent structurality. It uses structurality with exuberantly and in freedom.
Okay, so what about enjoyment? So, um, so when there's a noticing when you're stepping outside of what you think is important or what seems habitual, right? And then you're following your curiosity. There's naturally going to be an enjoyment of richness, or there's naturally going to be a sense of enjoyment.
There's always a sense of enjoyment. How does it feel to you? Here, right now, step outside your normal self. Do something you wouldn't do. Doesn't have to be a behavior, just in any sense.
No longer ask any more questions.
Okay, that would be good. So is there a sense of enjoyment?
I'm saying.
Well then, there you
When the mind finally lets go of all this partialization, is enjoyment pretty present?
Yes.
A great deal of time?
Yes. And, it's important, it's good that you put it let go, because partialization doesn't necessarily ever stop as a mode of mind, let's say. But it doesn't apply across the board. Even if some degree of that is happening, there's also a whole lot of not that happening. Whatever's happening, there's always vastly more than that happening. There's always vastly other than that happening. So that's why nothing's a problem, because whatever seems to be a problem or seems to be happening, there's also so much that's not that, which is simultaneously happening, and which is just as important, and which is just as relevant to you and your situation.
So it's like in seeing through the constant partializations.
Right.
there isn't a sense of anything's a problem.
Right.
And the absence of that enjoyment is just natural, spontaneous.
I didn't follow the last sentence.
In the absence of feeling like there's always something wrong,
Right.
enjoyment is just natural, spontaneous state.
Yeah. Actually, when it comes to see that enjoyment's a natural, spontaneous state, even when it does feel like something's wrong. But that's a little more, a little more of a graduate level.
Can you repeat that?
In the absence of partialization or feeling like something's wrong, there's a natural joy, a natural luscious vitality, openness, fullness, joy, well-being, great. And as one becomes more and more sensitive, as one becomes more and more liberated, that same sense of joy is found even when there is a presence of a sense of partialization and limitation and even suffering and all of that. That same wonderful joy and richness is always present, because it always is present. And when one has trained one's sensitivity to notice that that is the case, the background within which all event occurs is an astounding lusciousness and fullness and beautiful dynamism of pure intelligence and pure profundity. And that becomes more and more felt, more and more obvious, more and more self-verifyingly known constantly. So whatever's happening is just like this thin little oil scum on the surface of the ocean, and then this vast ocean with all these currents and dynamisms and life and everything else.
Usually, no matter what's going on, like when I feel joy, or it's in the body, it's a kind of a pleasant wash in the body.
Mm-hmm.
So are you saying that, is that the same joy you're talking about? Or is that
Yes, it is, only you'll come to realize that your entire experiential field is your body. So you'll feel this wash of joy everywhere. And in all sorts of contexts, many of which you might have previously not qualified as somatic.
like you look at the computer and you kind of feel it,
Absolutely.
and everything feels kind of pleasant?
Hell yeah. More than pleasant is too wishy-washy. Feels luscious. Feels like a luxurious, lustful caress.
All the time.
All the time.
And then what if you have like pain, like in the body?
Yeah.
Pain? Feels like
Sure.
something I can look forward to. How do people learn to live in that state?
You do.
I do. All of us
Everyone does.
just don't realize it.
Yeah. Well, you may or may not realize it.
No.
You may just not be identifying with the part of you that does realize it. When you say I don't realize it, what are you referring to by this I? Maybe there's another way, another reality that you could refer to by the same word that does know that.
This is why I enjoy dreaming so much, because I had this experience of having a dream about this ex-girlfriend of mine I really couldn't stand. And yet, I experienced her body like fully as mine. Like I felt her weight and her movement, and her like glaring at me with disapproval. I felt that as me, and it was mind-boggling. But there's other ways that I've experienced that. Being disembodied or having a bunch of bodies, or so.
Yeah, it's all very flexible. There's myriad perspectives and they're all viable.
I want whatever he's taking.
It's called a good night's sleep. It's called a good night's sleep.
Yes. Well, I wish. Yeah.
For you, was it kind of like flipping a switch? Like there was a day that you really woke up and realized everything is lusciousness all the time? where you start to live that?
Yes. Well, I mean, unfoldment is a very strange phenomenon. In a certain sense, the less said about it, the better. but I could say that in my experience, in my particular trajectory, there were two major events. The first of which, I saw what this is very clearly. And I saw what I am, and I saw the context that this exists in with itself. But it blew my mind. I knew that was the way it was, and I continually lived in that being the way it was. But I was still wandering around dizzy and like a crazy person. And then the second event was where that all stopped, and it was just, like you say, this is throwing a switch. But don't make too much of that, because neither of those events was, you can't say what they were, and just because it seemed to be that way doesn't mean it actually was that way, and doesn't mean it has any importance whatsoever, especially not to anyone else.
Right.
Unfoldment is kind of like a particle-wave duality. It definitely shows up as certain major events, but it also can definitely show up as a gradual continuum. And the interrelationship between those two is unparsable.
Probably every day, every few days, an hour, a few hours of like bliss or like non-separation, like dissolving into the flow.
Cool.
But then it's usually followed by washes of lucky luck, terrible lucky luck.
Cool. So whatever. I mean, again, the point is just feel it. Feel what's there. And especially when you're able to really feel what's there in greater depth, go into it, really try and push your own envelope at those times. And when you're not feeling it, don't try and struggle with those. Just like surrender, like, okay, I'm screwed, I don't have it now. I've lost for a while. It's like when you have a chance of winning the battle, fight the battle. When you feel like you're losing the battle, just lie down and give up. Don't try to keep fighting.
And this analogy of winning is like you can really do the noticing practice effectively. Or is it just,
Sorry, say it again.
when you say winning, since you're using like you can do noticing.
Yeah. So when you have a perspective where all of a sudden you really seem to be, wow, you're really tuning into things and whatever, go with that. And when that seems to be fading, don't cling to it and try and force it. Just let it go. Relax, and then you might be sucked into whatever, and just don't even worry about it. Just like you lost it. It's like a tide. When the tide's going your way, swim like crazy. When it shifts, just let go and float with the stream. And then when it starts going your way again, swim like crazy. Don't try to swim all the time, because it's not so effective and you'll just tire yourself out.
And what is swimming like crazy? Like just.
You discover that, you figure it out. Noticing whatever you want to, I mean, that's the artfulness of yoga, is you learn how to do it by doing it. You learn what it is by doing it.
Swimming like crazy can feel like just doing it.
Huh?
So swimming like crazy can feel like just.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, again, you can't specify what it is. It's an art that you come to for yourself, because it's entirely a subjective, subtle energy orientation that has nothing to do with anything you could possibly put into words. So there's no point trying to think about it or describe it. I mean, I use these euphemisms like noticing or, whatever. But those are all just tricks. That's not what it really is. You have to discover it for yourself experientially. It's a way of sitting in your own experience, and you have to discover it for yourself. But I really recommend this kind of reciprocating engine thing, where when you got it, really hammer away at it. When you begin to lose it, just let go. don't struggle. Don't try to keep it, cling it, or cling to it, or fight your way out of it, or fight your way to it, or anything like that. I think you'll find that that's maximal efficiency.
You talk about doing the math, but that's like, so along the lines of what you were just saying, doing the math is when you're feeling it, you pound away at it, right? And then
doing the math means what way to put it. It means filling in all the blanks. Don't let yourself be satisfied with broad generalizations. Really prove it to yourself. In as broad a field as possible. So you leave yourself no wiggle room to for anything other than what the way you discover it to be. I don't know if I put that very clearly. So if you get an insight, like follow it. Look at it here, look at it there, look at how does it fit here, how does that fit here? I mean, really, apply it across the board as broadly as you can, and see the way in which it's true in all the situations. You'll have proved it, rather than have it just be true provisionally in this one little flash of insight. But you've verified it and proven that it's true everywhere. It's not just dependent upon things being a certain way. Because what's powerful is what's always true. Little partialities are not powerful. What's unavoidably true, what you can't get away from, that's what's powerful. So for something that's powerful, not only can you find it everywhere, but you can't avoid finding it everywhere. So any time you discover something that seems like a revelation, see the way in which it's true in other contexts, and if it's powerfully true, you'll find it everywhere.
So
that's what I mean by doing the math.
The mistake is to feel like the revelation is like some rarity, or is.
Yeah, partially. It's like, I mean, my analogy of doing the math comes from, it's like looking at the answers at the end of the book. It's real easy to do. I mean, I can sit here and I do all the time, reel off principles of liberation and reality, what it is, and you can memorize those and say, oh, okay, now I get it. But that's not powerful because you haven't done the math. You have to see for yourself the way in which these principles are actually true and the way that they are true everywhere. And then you own them. Then you are them. Then you see that, yes, this is my reality and my reality is that way. And then it's powerful and it's liberating.
Is it complacency or what that keeps one from doing the math? Or is it like it's just a falling back into...
It's laziness. Yeah, falling back into habit. We're generally very comfortable with the dichotomized mode where we find something wonderful over here, but then there's the rest of our crap life and we sort of fall back into that. And it takes more perseverance to climb out of that mode of the special and then the ordinary, and really when you find that the truly special, you'll find it actually applies in the ordinary too. And then the ordinary, then there is no ordinary. There's nothing but special. And that invalidates all specialness, because then everything's the same. There's only,
Which can be initially disappointing.
well, it's strange. It's strange. It's strange.
If you want to be special.
Yeah. Yeah. Specialness depends upon ordinariness to be special. And when there's nothing is ordinary, then there's nothing. Then you could say everything is special. You could say nothing is special, but that's just two ways of saying the same thing. But that's what liberation is made of. That's what liberation looks like.